Let's just jump right in with a quote from, one of the biggest names in Western philosophy, Aristotle. He wrote, "The male is by nature superior and the female inferior. The one rules and the other is ruled." Wow. I mean, to our ears today, that is just a shocking thing to read, and it really sets the stage for what we're talking about.
And look, Aristotle wasn't some kind of outlier. Fast forward centuries and you get another giant, Immanuel Kant, writing that if a woman actually succeeds at laborious learning, it destroys her femininity. These aren't just some fringe opinions, you guys. These are ideas from the absolute core figures who built the foundations of modern ethics. So when you see this kind of deep, historical bias baked into the system, you just know there has to be a response, right? A powerful intellectual pushback. And that is exactly what we're going to dive into today. Feminist ethics and its most famous idea, the ethics of care.
But first, to really get why this was so revolutionary, we need to understand what's been called philosophy's woman problem. Because for hundreds and hundreds of years, the whole field of ethics was built on a foundation that had some, let's say, pretty serious cracks.
And here's the bottom line. For centuries, the major ethical theories that shaped our world were written almost entirely by men, in societies that actively discriminated against women. And this created two massive problems. First, it meant that the experiences of half the population were just completely ignored. And second, it led to these totally false, damaging claims about women, just like the ones we just saw.
So in response to all this, a totally new approach started to emerge, one that offered a fundamentally different way of thinking about our moral lives. It was time for a new moral compass.
And that brings us to feminist ethics. Now, it's important to know this isn't just one single theory. It's more of a whole approach, and its core mission is pretty simple but profound: to correct that historical failure, to finally take the experiences and perspectives of women seriously, not as a side note, but as a vital piece of the puzzle of what morality even is.
So this whole approach is built on four central claims. First, and this was the big one, women are the moral equals of men. Sounds obvious now, right? But it was a huge deal. Second, women's experiences aren't just something to add on later. They are vital to getting a full picture of morality. Third, it says that traits we've traditionally called feminine, like empathy, compassion, care, are at least as morally important as masculine ones like justice and independence. And finally, number four, it makes the bold claim that traditionally feminine ways of reasoning, being flexible, cooperative, are often superior to rigid, rule-based thinking.
Okay, so let's see how these big ideas get turned into a specific ethical theory that has become incredibly influential. Let's talk about the ethics of care.
All right, instead of starting with some abstract, high-level principle, the ethics of care start somewhere way more down to earth, the relationship between a parent and a child. Just think about that for a second. That bond isn't governed by some impartial set of rules or a contract. No way. It's built on love, on connection, on this intense personal responsibility for another human being. And that becomes the model for how we should think about all morality.
And this right here, this shows you the fundamental shift in thinking. Traditional theories, they're all about impartial justice. They see emotions as messy distractions, and they focus on abstract rules and rights. The ethics of care just flips the script. Its guiding principle is caring relationships. It sees emotions as a source of moral wisdom, and it focuses on the real, specific needs of the individual people right in front of us.
I mean, this is a complete 180 from someone like Kant, right? He basically saw emotions as a corrupting influence on pure, cold reason. But for care ethicists, emotions like empathy, sympathy, love, they aren't obstacles you have to overcome to be moral. They are the tools you use. I mean, how can you possibly know what's right for someone if you don't feel for them, if you can't put yourself in their shoes?
So, what does this actually look like in the real world? The world that's complicated and messy and doesn't fit into neat little philosophical boxes. Well, this brings us to this core idea, prioritizing our relationships over rigid rules.
So many of the old school theories were obsessed with finding that one supreme moral rule, the one rule to rule them all that could solve any problem. The ethics of care says, nope, that's a pipe dream. It argues that the search for a rule like that is a total dead end. Morality is complicated, it's messy, and the right thing to do always depends on the context and the people involved. Let's make this super practical. Imagine this. Your parents ask you what you really think about your boyfriend, and they kind of want you to be critical. Now, a simple rule like always tell the truth, well, it's kind of useless here, isn't it? It completely ignores the real harm it could do to your boyfriend, to your relationship with him, to your relationship with your parents.
A care ethics approach says the answer isn't in a rule book. You find it by carefully thinking about the needs and feelings of the actual people in this messy situation.
And this all leads to a really important idea that directly challenges traditional ethics: partiality. It's the belief that it is not just okay, but morally good and right to give special priority to the people we care about. We have a stronger moral duty to our own kids or our best friends than we do to complete strangers, precisely because morality grows out of these special, caring connections.
Okay, but no theory is perfect, and it's super important to look at the other side. The ethics of care has faced some really significant challenges and critiques, and we've got to understand those too.
So, critics started asking some really tough questions. For instance, if morality is all about care, does that mean we have zero moral duties to strangers or people in other countries, or even people we just plain don't like? And can we really trust our emotions? We all know feelings can be biased or just plain wrong. And what about a judge or a boss? We want them to be impartial, not to favor their friends. And if we throw out universal rules, how do we ever solve big moral disagreements? And finally, what about justice and rights? Aren't those still a huge, crucial part of living a good life?
So, with all those challenges on the table, what's the ultimate contribution here? Well, it's that this framework invites every single one of us to take a broader, more complete view of what it means to be a moral person.
And let's be absolutely clear about a really common misunderstanding. Feminist ethics is not just some niche ethic for women. That's not the goal at all. The recommendations to value care, to listen to our emotions, to prioritize our relationships, these are intended for everyone, for men and women alike. The hope is to build a richer, more humane moral world for all of us.
This quote just nails it, doesn't it? The whole idea is that by making care the centerpiece, by giving our emotions and our relationships a real seat at the table in our moral thinking, we can actually make a substantial, positive difference in how we see the world and treat each other.
So I'm going to leave you with this final, really tricky thought experiment. You're hiring for a job. Your close friend applies, but honestly, they're less qualified than some of the other candidates. A traditional view would scream, be impartial, hire the best person, period. But an ethic of care suggests you have a special duty to help your friend. So, what do? What does morality demand? There is no easy answer, and that, right there, is exactly the point.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going deep into moral philosophy, but maybe from an angle you haven't considered. We're looking critically at the foundations of Western ethics.
Yeah, it's fascinating because when you look at the really big theories, Kantianism, utilitarianism, all those heavy hitters,
Right.
you notice something pretty striking.
Which is?
Well, they were almost exclusively developed by men. And not just men, but men living in societies that systematically, even legally, discriminated against women, excluded them from public life, from power.
That historical context feels really important. It kind of casts a shadow, doesn't it? Suggests that maybe this whole centuries-long quest for universal, impartial moral rules might have some inherent biases built right in.
Exactly. If you're leaving out the moral experiences and perspectives of, well, half the population, how universal can your system really be? It seems almost inevitable that it would be incomplete or skewed.
And we're not talking subtle omissions here. Some of the sources we reviewed really drive home how explicit this exclusion was. I mean, you've got actual quotes. Aristotle.
Oh, Aristotle, yeah. Claiming quite bluntly that the male is by nature superior and the female inferior.
Wow. And it didn't stop there, did it? Fast forward centuries. Kant.
Immanuel Kant, yeah, the giant of duty-based ethics. He actually warned that if a woman engaged in, quote, laborious learning, it would destroy the merits that are proper to her sex.
It's hard to even process that mindset now.
Right. Or think about Rousseau, champion of liberty, but then he turns around and insists that the inequality between men and women, that's based on reason, not prejudice, and that women must be trained specifically to submit.
So the pattern is pretty clear. Okay, our mission then for this deep dive is to explore the ethical response that emerged from recognizing this pattern. We're talking about feminist ethics, and specifically a theory it helped generate, the ethics of care.
That's right. We want to unpack how these approaches really challenge those traditional systems. They shift the focus, prioritizing things like relationships, emotions, specific situations, moving away from just abstract rules.
Okay, so if the old guard, let's say, either justified subordination or just kind of overlooked women's experiences, what is feminist ethics actually trying to do? What's the goal?
Good question. First off, it's important to see feminist ethics less as one single theory and more as a broad approach, a corrective lens, really. It's trying to fix those fundamental flaws that came from ignoring or devaluing female perspectives and experiences.
Okay, so a framework for correction. What are the key pillars of that framework? The sources laid out some core claims, right?
Yeah, they did. Basically 4 foundational ideas. The first one is pretty fundamental. Women are the moral equals of men. Full stop.
So any theory that implies or justifies subordination
Is simply mistaken from this perspective. It's based on a false premise.
Got it. What's the second claim?
The second builds on that. The experiences of women deserve respect and are actually crucial for getting morality right. If a theory ignores women's lived experiences, it's probably going to be biased, inaccurate even.
That already feels like a big shift because, like you said, traditional ethics often seem built around the public square, right? Laws, contracts, abstract duties.
Exactly. Things often associated, historically at least, with men's roles. The private sphere, family, caregiving, home life, that was often seen as somehow less morally significant. Or just different, not the real stuff of ethics.
Which leads us where?
To the third claim. It argues that traits traditionally associated with women, things like empathy, sympathy, caring, nurturing, compassion, these are just as morally important, maybe even more so in some contexts than the traits traditionally seen as masculine.
Like competitiveness, independence, abstract reasoning.
Right. Feminist ethics says we need to value both sets of traits. It rejects that old idea that being emotional is somehow a moral failing that reason needs to suppress.
Okay, so equality, respecting experience, valuing feminine traits. What's the fourth claim?
The fourth claim suggests that traditional feminine ways of moral reasoning, which might emphasize things like cooperation, flexibility, being really attuned to the specific context of a situation, are often superior to the masculine approach that focuses rigidly on abstract rules and principles.
That's a bold claim, superior.
It is, but the idea is that life is messy, and sometimes strict adherence to a rule just doesn't lead to the best moral outcome. Sometimes flexibility and understanding the nuances are key.
Now, the sources do add a really important clarification here, don't they? About not falling into stereotypes.
Absolutely crucial. We have to be careful. These are generalizations about historical associations and cultural pressures, not, biological destiny.
Right. It's not saying all women are like this or all men are like that.
Not at all. It's saying that certain ways of thinking and feeling, which culture often labeled feminine and subsequently devalued, are actually really important for a complete moral picture. These perspectives have been neglected, and feminist ethics tries to bring them back into focus.
And it's that focus on the relational, the caring perspective, that directly leads into this specific theory, the ethics of care, making that maternal model almost a starting point.
That's a good way to put it. Traditional ethics often started with the autonomous individual or the abstract principle. Care ethics often starts by looking at the relationship between, say, a caregiver and a child as a fundamental moral paradigm.
And how does that starting point make it different from the big theories we mentioned earlier?
The contrasts are really stark. Let's take 3 big ones. First, unlike ethical egoism, care ethics isn't about always putting yourself first. That's obvious.
Sure.
Second, unlike Kantianism, it doesn't say abstract justice or universal duties are always the supreme consideration. Sometimes the relationship demands something else.
Okay, and the third? You mentioned utilitarianism.
Right. This is a big one. Unlike utilitarianism, care ethics fundamentally rejects the demand for impartial benevolence.
Remind us what that is again.
It's the idea that, morally speaking, you should care equally about everyone. Your own child and a child starving on the other side of the world should, in theory, carry the same weight in your moral calculations.
Which sounds noble, but maybe not very human.
Exactly. Care ethicists argue it's psychologically unrealistic and maybe even morally questionable. They embrace partiality. They say it's not just okay, it's morally right to give priority special weight to the people you have close relationships with, your family, your friends.
So let's make that concrete. Say my kid and the neighbor's kid both need help at the same time, equally urgently. Traditional ethics might tie itself in knots trying to find an impartial rule.
Like who benefits more? Or flipping a coin.
Yeah. But care ethics would say?
Care ethics would say it's entirely morally appropriate, even expected, for you to prioritize your own child. That specific loving relationship creates a unique and powerful moral obligation. It stems from the care itself.
It focuses on the responsibility embedded in the relationship.
Precisely. Think about it in your own life, If someone you love is hurting, You don't usually start by calculating their desserts or applying a universal rule. You respond with care, with empathy, based on that connection. Care ethics puts that kind of response at the center of moral life, not at the margins.
So this care, then, it sounds like it's deeply tied to emotions, which is another area where traditional ethics often got a bit uncomfortable.
Absolutely. Care isn't just an action. It's described as a network of feelings and attitudes. Sympathy, love, sensitivity, empathy. And these aren't seen as, irrational distractions from morality.
How are they seen instead?
They're seen as essential, central, really, for a couple of reasons. First, motivation. Let's be honest. Often it's love or concern, not abstract duty, that actually gets us off the couch to help someone.
Fair enough.
And it's about
reason.
Moral discovery. Emotions help us perceive what's needed. Empathy allows us to understand, or at least try to understand, what someone else is going through. Sensitivity helps us pick up on subtle cues. A parent often knows what their child needs without words, right? That comes from that emotional attunement.
That's such a different picture from, from Kant, who basically thought emotions cloud judgment and should be ignored in moral reasoning.
A complete contrast. And also different from utilitarians who, while focused on happiness, tended to ignore the role of emotion in figuring out how to achieve it. Care ethics says, no, we need a much richer understanding of how thinking and feeling work together in moral life.
Okay, so emotions are in. What about rules? Traditional ethics was obsessed with finding the one big rule, wasn't it? The supreme principle.
The Holy Grail, yeah. The principle of utility, the categorical imperative, one rule to bind them all.
Care ethics.
Forget it. It's a pipe dream. Morality, they argue, is inherently complicated and messy. Real life constantly throws conflicting demands at us. Trying to force it all under one simple rule just doesn't reflect reality.
You can feel that, can't you? Trying to balance, say, your responsibilities to your kids versus your job versus maybe a sick parent versus being honest with a friend. There's often no single rule that cleanly resolves those conflicts.
Exactly. You have duties pulling you in different directions, stemming from different relationships and roles. Moral maturity, in this view, isn't about finding the one rule. It's about learning to navigate these complexities, often needing creativity and sensitivity rather than just rule following.
And does this view on rules connect to how feminist ethics thinks about rights? Because rights seem very rule-based, very focused on the individual.
It does connect. There's a critique that traditional ethics maybe overemphasizes rights, autonomy, independence, freedom from interference.
What's the potential problem with focusing too much on rights?
Well, while rights are obviously crucial for protection, especially for vulnerable groups, an exclusive focus on them can sometimes create barriers between people. It emphasizes separateness, individuality, my entitlements versus yours. It can let people sort of retreat into their own space and ignore the needs of the community.
So what's the alternative focus?
Responsibility. Shifting the emphasis towards our responsibilities to each other, to care for each other. Again, modeling morality more on that caring parent figure, focusing on connection, cooperation, and paying special attention to those who are most vulnerable.
The sources mentioned this might even offer a different way to approach really stuck debates, like abortion.
Yeah, the suggestion was that framing it solely in terms of conflicting rights, the right to choose versus the right to life, often leads to deadlock. Shifting the conversation towards shared responsibilities, responsibility to the woman, to potential life, to the community might maybe open up more possibility for common ground. It's a different starting point for the conversation.
It's a compelling framework.
Yeah.
But okay, let's test it. Let's put this idea of partiality, or prioritizing relationships, into a tricky situation outside the family.
Okay, let's hear it.
Right, so imagine Elizabeth. She's a hiring manager at a tech company, needs a new software developer. Her good friend Janice applies. Janice is qualified, definitely meets the basic requirements, but Elizabeth reviews all the applications, and honestly, there are two other candidates who are just objectively better qualified, more experience, maybe stronger technical skills.
Ah, the classic dilemma.
Exactly.
Okay.
So does Elizabeth have a special duty, rooted in her caring relationship with Janice, to help her friend get the job, even though others are better on paper? How does care ethics handle that kind of partiality in a professional setting where we usually expect impartiality?
Yeah, this is crucial, because if care ethics only works for family and close friends, it's not a complete moral picture, is it? In a role like hiring manager, there's a strong argument, even within a care perspective, that Elizabeth has taken on specific responsibilities tied to that role. Responsibilities to the company, to fairness towards all applicants, maybe even to the other employees who depend on hiring the best person.
So just giving the job to Janice because they're friends? That would be wrong.
Most care ethicists would likely say yes. That specific action would be wrong because it violates the duties inherent in the role she's occupying. Impartiality is often a key virtue within certain roles.
But does the care for Janice just disappear then?
No, not necessarily. Care ethics might suggest that Elizabeth's responsibility to Janice shifts. It's not about unfairly giving her the job, but maybe about how she handles the situation. Perhaps ensuring Janice gets helpful feedback, or actively helping her network, or mentoring her to find a position where she is the best fit. The care finds a different expression, one that doesn't violate the role-based duties.
Okay, that makes sense. It's about navigating the responsibilities of the role alongside the responsibilities of the relationship. It's nuanced.
Very nuanced. And it highlights that feminist ethics, including care ethics, isn't without its own internal questions and challenges, especially when you move it out into the wider world.
What are some of those main challenges the sources point out?
Well, there are three big ones they raise. First is the scope of morality. If the primary model is close relationships like mother and child, does care ethics risk limiting our moral concern only to those near and dear?
Yeah. What about strangers, people we don't like, global poverty?
Exactly. There's a need to articulate how and why that circle of care should expand outwards. How do we ground duties to people we don't have personal relationships with? That's a major ongoing discussion.
Okay, scope is one. What else?
Second challenge is impartiality again. We just saw it with Elizabeth. Clearly, impartiality is a vital virtue sometimes for judges, teachers, grading papers, officials distributing resources. So the challenge is figuring out when is partiality the right moral stance and when is impartiality required? Where's the line and how do we know?
Finding that balance.
Right. And the third challenge is very practical, cooperation versus competition. Care ethics strongly emphasizes cooperation, connection, mutual support, which is great. But, well, we live in a world with a lot of competition.
Business, sports, politics. Sometimes you have to compete. And sometimes you have to deal with people or even governments who simply refuse to cooperate.
Precisely. So while valuing cooperation is key, feminist ethics also needs strategies for navigating conflict, for dealing with uncooperative actors, for situations where competition might be unavoidable or even necessary. You can't just assume everyone's going to play nice.
So scope, impartiality, and cooperation competition. Lots to still work through.
Definitely. It's an evolving perspective.
So wrapping this up then, what's the big picture takeaway from this dive into feminist ethics and the ethics of care? What should we be left thinking about?
I think the main thing is that it represents a fundamental shift. It moves the center of gravity in ethics away from abstract rules and impartial calculations and towards the messy, concrete realities of human relationships, emotions, and specific situations.
And importantly, it's not just an ethic for women.
Absolutely not. The argument is that this offers a richer, more complete moral perspective that benefits everyone. It highlights crucial aspects of our moral lives like love, empathy, responsibility within relationships that the more traditional male-dominated theories often sidelined or just plain missed.
So it's about valuing cooperation and responsibility, maybe alongside or sometimes even above pure independence and abstract rights.
Right.
Making care central.
Making care central, yes. And accepting that morality isn't always neat and tidy. It's complex, sometimes ambiguous, and maybe that's okay. Learning to navigate that complexity is part of being morally mature.
Okay, so one final thought to leave everyone with, drawing from the sources. Let's go back to a classic ethical dilemma. Heinz. His wife is dying, right? Needs a drug. Pharmacist invented it, charges way too much, won't budge. Heinz considers stealing it.
The standard setup. Traditional ethics usually asks, what's the rule? Is there a universal duty not to steal, or a duty to save a life that overrides it?
Right. But now, try looking at it through the lens we've been discussing. If you model Heinz's dilemma, not as a conflict of abstract rights, property rights versus the right to life, but more like a parent-child relationship, a relationship defined by inherent care and responsibility.
How does that change the question?
Yeah. Does it change your gut feeling about whether Heinz should steal the drug? And maybe more importantly, does it change why? What kind of justification feels more compelling when you start from a place of care and relationship rather than impartial rules?
Something to definitely chew on. How does prioritizing that specific loving responsibility potentially reframe the whole problem?
A question to ponder. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.